Probably were in the same building that I was in, though, where it was like everything in that one building on New Jersey Avenue. And then I go back.
I figured the Ed would have been built by the time you were there. You're a youngster.
Well, thank you, but it wasn't. So we had everything in this one building. Yeah. The nicest thing in the neighborhood was the homeless shelter.
Yeah, that was nicer than the strip club. Yeah.
We'll go around the table and introduce ourselves for the people who are watching the live stream. My name, first of all, welcome to LNP.
Thank you.
Grateful and glad that you're here. My name is Suzanne Cassidy. I'm the opinion editor. Go this way.
Oh,
and we'll go around.
Should I introduce myself? Okay, so I am Michelle Bernard, and I am the president of the Bernard Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, and a contributor at MSNBC, and I'm glad to be here.
Cheryl Holland-Jones, Executive Director of Christmas Addicts.
My name is Ron Ford. I'm a volunteer at Christmas Addicts and also a former county commissioner.
Ted Dargis, President of Christmas Addicts Community Center Board.
I'm Bob Krasny, the publisher of LNP Media Group, and I'd like to welcome you all today.
I'm John Kirkpatrick, President of LNP Media Group.
Joe Hinkler, Deputy Opinion Editor of LNP.
Keith Bell.
Of 3 weeks.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Well, let's start where our editorial today started, which is on the relevance of Dr. King.
Mm-hmm.
Seems that what he had to say should speak to us more today than ever, and I was wondering if you could open with some thoughts on that.
I think, and I was thinking about this, I've been thinking, Keith and I had the privilege of screening the film Selma that I mentioned in my keynote earlier today, and if you haven't seen it, I urge everyone to see the movie. And there were so many scenes that were so striking, and but for the clothing that people wore during that time period, there was really no difference in a lot of aspects of the lives of African American men and women 50 years ago versus today. So there was a scene in the film that I didn't expect. It was very jarring, and you see, the 4 adorable little black girls walking down the stairs at church, and they're talking about Coretta Scott King's hair and how pretty she is, and just being children, and in seconds the church is blown up and they're bombed. And then, scenes where you see African American men shot or bullied and killed. And I recall a woman sitting beside me in the theater saying, same thing's happening 50 years later. And watching the scenes of Dr. King on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the second time they tried to march, and it wasn't just Dr. King, and it wasn't just African Americans, and it wasn't just, sort of like the what we tend to think of as the Civil Rights Movement, which is just Baptist clergy. I mean, there were Jews, there were Catholics, there were Christians, there were whites, there were blacks, there were men, there were women. And Dr. King, I think part of his brilliance was understanding that we couldn't do it if we didn't all do it together. And I think more than anything else for me, that is the relevance of Dr. King's message today and celebrating his legacy, because honestly, where we are in American politics today, nothing will change if we don't do it together. I can't do it by myself. The African American community cannot do it by itself. Sometimes we have a habit for lots of reasons of speaking in terms of demographics. I'm a Latino American, I'm an African American, I'm a Chinese American. We're all Americans, which was the message I was trying to explain today. The blood that runs in my veins runs in your veins. And if we don't do it together, we're not going to change it. Sometimes it's difficult to hear a message you don't want to hear. There are scenes, I know there's controversy in the film, there are scenes that I believe Lyndon Johnson's family said didn't really happen, and he was pro-civil rights all along, but needless to say, from the perspective, I would assume that if you're a politician, whether it was 50 years ago or today, it's easier to say, hold off, wait a second, don't bring that issue up yet. And we need people today who were like Dr. King, who will say, there is never an appropriate time to tell anyone to wait for social justice, and we all need to do it.
Do you fear that we're having trouble coming together? Do you feel that we're, that the events of the past year have been so polarizing and painful? Yes,
I fear it because it's palpable. I think in 2008, after the president was elected, I really believed that we were in a post-racial America, and I said it, and I was the biggest cheerleader. Finally, post-racial America. It feels, and I say this as a mother, it's anecdotal. I don't have any statistics to share with you, but anecdotally, it feels that acts of overt racism, whether it is through language or through violence, have increased dramatically since the president was elected. I read a study, I think it was produced at New York University, I could be wrong, but it talked about, in essence, that when we have difficult economic times in this country, race relations get worse. People, are sort of scrounging for what is theirs, and it makes things difficult. And so, there is an argument to be had that it is not always because people are angry at the election of an African American president, but that maybe it is human nature because he was elected at a time when the country basically imploded financially, and we are still recovering. And I say that to say because there are always two sides to an argument, and different people have different feelings. But again, as a mother, I look at things since 2008, and not just like last year, which was the tip of the iceberg. It was just horrible. But if you look at like small things, like people yelling, "You lie," at the president during a joint session of Congress. I mean, this is not just partisan politics. Republicans hated Bill Clinton, and no one would have ever done that to Bill Clinton, and I can't see any other reason that somebody felt it was appropriate to do it to the president other than the fact that he's black. Caricatures of him, or and statements about welfare recipients, and he's a Muslim, and a this and a that, and it goes on and on and on and on. And if at the highest levels of the U.S. government you feel it appropriate to exercise your free speech in a way that demeans the nation's president, that's going to trickle down, and other people will feel that he's unimportant, and people who look like him are unimportant, despite his education, despite the books that he's written, and despite the fact that he was elected twice by a large majority of Americans. And black people didn't put him in office by themselves. There are not enough black people in this country to have made him president of the United States. So yeah, I do fear it.
Yeah, some of the characterizations of the First Lady have been alarming too.
Yes. And it's, there is, one of the reasons I mentioned in my keynote earlier that we have a moral responsibility to engage in civil discourse is precisely for this reason. And people forget that our children learn their values from watching us and from watching their parents watch the news or read the newspaper and seeing your reaction to how people treat the president and the first lady and what you think is important and what you think is unimportant. The backlash that the first lady has suffered because of her anti-obesity campaign is ridiculous. If you go, for example, to many rural and urban communities, and you go into neighborhoods that are really underserved, most of the inhabitants are women. A lot of times you will see, as I have in Washington, mother, daughter, and grandmother, all very young, living in the same home together, and the only men in the neighborhood are police officers policing the streets. And there are no grocery stores. There's always I would challenge anybody in America to do this. Go into any rural area or urban area in a Section 8 housing community and tell me if you can find a grocery store. But you can find a liquor store on every street with liquor and processed food. And then you wonder why poor white and black children have an obesity problem or suffer from certain diseases. And I think one of the things that the First Lady has done is in highlighting this problem of food deserts and childhood obesity and diseases that are preventable just because of the food you eat is something that wonderful that she's done for the country. And instead we have people, not to demean them, because I agree we all have a right to a difference of opinion, but some of the jokes that are made and people showing up at schools with plates full of cookies as if it's a joke, and for a lot of the children that her message could serve, they probably couldn't even get the cookie in the corner store. All they can get is a bottle of liquor. I think it's disgraceful. I think that all of us, whether we are Democrats or Republicans or independents, have a moral responsibility to listen to the other side and find areas of common ground and move the ball forward on something.
You, and then I'll open this up to everyone else, but you are yourself, you've had an interesting journey,
Yes,
right?
yes.
In terms of your political, were you involved with Reagan, Cheney, and all, or the other?
Reagan would be too old for me,
Yeah, Bush,
but yes,
Cheney,
yes, I worked on the
Right,
Bush
on the
Cheney inauguration.
Mhm.
I have been a Republican. I have been a Democrat, and I am, I think, like a lot of people, a very zealous independent with an enormous eye. There are things about the Republican Party platform that speak to me as a woman, as an African American, and frankly as the daughter of immigrants who sometimes have a view of things that are different than others. There are things about the Republican Party platform that I find repulsive. There are things about the Democratic Party platform that I love and I embrace, and there are things about the platform that I will say I have an allergy to. And I think, though, that if you go and I really hate this sense of political labels, because if you go and you talk to so many Americans, and it doesn't matter what their race is, there are issues where people are quote unquote conservative on those issues. There are issues where you're liberal, but for some reason we think that you have to choose one or the other. And at least for me, there are times where one politician might speak more to me than another and be a member of a political party that, I don't like or I don't understand. But I think we see more and more people self-identifying as independents for that reason. It's kind of a fascinating way to say, you know what, the American public is smarter than you give us credit for, and so you should court me and give me a reason to vote for you. And And I don't think we'll ever get to a point in time where we are, have, no parties. But I think it'd be better.
Well, I brought that up because it makes your, I think, recent statements all the more interesting.
Okay.
About when you stated your belief that there's a war on black boys and black men in America. Because you aren't the traditional leftist,
Yes. Yes.
that, if someone else had said that, that would have been, of
What do you
course.
expect?
Right.
Yeah, I actually read something where someone wrote, even Michelle Bernard thinks, blah, 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 blah.
Right,
So, yeah,
right.
yeah.
Do you, has it been the events of the past couple of years that have just made you realize this? Is it because your children have reached a certain age and you have a real fear for particularly your son? What do you think has moved you to this belief?
I don't know how you can watch the news and just not, it's right in front of you. And people have disagreed with me vehemently, and that's fine. That's their perspective, and I have my perspective. But the last year in particular, I think I started paying more attention to it in '08 when the president was running for the first time, and just sort of little jabs and statements here and there that to me were particularly anti-black male. And a fear of black men became more palpable to me. A fear of all black men became more palpable to me. And then the events of then we had the Gina 6 in Louisiana. And you kind of think, this is more than a coincidence. Something's going on here. And then the last year, it was just one right after the other, right after the other. And as a mother, particularly if you have sons, black sons, you can't help but be fearful. And that's what has moved me. That could be my child. And we're all human.
You have a talk with your son? Have you had to do the talk with your son?
I did. We were watching.
Explain that to people who don't understand what that
Yeah,
is.
so the talk, and I had the talk with my son, I will tell you, I guess it was August, we were watching television, and we were watching the protests in Ferguson, and my son looked at me and just point blank said, are the police going to shoot me? So, and he's 11, so that was the time for the talk. And the talk is that, and God bless them, that my children and their friends, they don't really see people in terms of black or white, at least not stereotypes, just, whatever. They don't make those distinctions. It doesn't matter to them. And that's the way I want them to be raised, to understand that we are all God's children, that God loves all of us equally, and that we are all human beings. But that being said, the reality of the situation is I had to explain to my son that not all people are like his friends, or the parents of his classmates who are white. Some are not white. Some are African American or whatever. Sort of make up the rainbow that is America, but that not all people are like them, and that there are people who, as he gets older, will view him in different ways just because of the way he looks. I've had to talk with him about what it is to be a man, from my perspective, and to carry yourself with pride, and with respect, and to demand that people respect you, and not to ever allow anyone to put him in the position where he becomes the stereotype that we see of sort of the buffoon or the jolly, happy black man. I'm so happy, do whatever you want to me, and I'll just keep taking it, And we've also had to have the discussion about how to behave if you're questioned by a police officer. And it's just something you have to do. You're polite. Yes, sir. No, sir. Officer so-and-so. Answer their questions. Whenever you can drive, you keep your hands on the steering wheel so they can always be seen. And more importantly than anything else, I've explained to both of my children that there will come a time very soon. I hope not, but I believe that there will come a time very soon for both of them where the activities that children engage in, just because kids are stupid and do stupid things, my children will not have the benefit of getting away with them the way a white child would. So going to a beer party in college and getting really, really intoxicated and running around campus naked or whatever, more likely than not, a white male doing that at any college in the country is probably going to get spoken to and get into some sort of trouble, minor trouble, at college. A black male might be put out of school for doing something like that. So you start the discussions now, because you have to remember them, and you have to do it over and over and over again, because it is a dangerous world, and we have children who watch it all and they absorb it, and they want to know why people do those things.
How does it make you feel to have that kind of a conversation with your kids?
Intellectually, it makes me feel sad to have that kind of conversation with them, because I would have hoped that things had changed enough that it wouldn't be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me sad on an intellectual level, but in another sense, I'm just not surprised. I mean, I can remember my parents having, quote unquote, the talk, different versions of the talk, all throughout my life and my sisters and my brother. And so there's a part of me where it just feels that it's just very normal. It's no different than the talk you have with your children about, sexual reproduction or the importance of academics. It's just that it's different for me and my community, because it's something you probably don't have to do. Others don't have to do with their children. I mean, maybe that is the saddest part of it, that it's just a normal part of life for African American parents. It's reality. Yeah.
The Ferguson, Missouri incident, I think with the election of Obama, there was a sort of a feeling in this country that in terms of race and everything was sort of, things have improved.
Mm-hmm.
I think the incident in Ferguson has sort of opened our eyes again.
Yes.
That we have some real serious problems in this country.
Yes.
We have isolated minority communities that are disconnected with the general populace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in one of your comments, you said that you were a supporter of Obama, but now you feel that you wish he would have done more, or he could have done more. I think and I was wondering if you'd like to just talk about this, the reality versus what maybe a lot of Americans thought was happening, and the reality of what is happening, and also what maybe a person like Obama could have done or should have done.
Or can do. I'm going to put a positive spin on it.
Yeah.
I have always been the person who says, and has always believed, that the president is the president of the United States. He's the president of all of us. And I, in the past, was, really reticent to understand members of the African American community who said, he is our first African American president, and he should be doing something that specifically addresses the needs of the African American community. And my feeling was, and probably his advisors also, any policies that are prescribed that will help the American community in general will inure to the benefit of African Americans, period. And then Ferguson happened, and the incidents in New York happened. And then, quite frankly, I'll tell you, I saw the film Selma, and I sat back and I just kept watching, and I kept thinking, this is his legacy. If I were his mother, and I were to be thinking about what the history books would say about my son as the first African American president of the United States of America, I would want my legacy to be more than healthcare reform. And it's absolutely important. it's absolutely critical that every American have access to affordable health care. But I think that if he does not speak out in a way that he did when he was the candidate Obama and gave that incredible speech in 2008 on race and on Reverend Wright, he will have lost an opportunity, I believe, to go down in, at least in American history, as one of the greatest presidents we've ever had, because he can speak to it in a way that no one else can understand. I can understand it as an African American, but I certainly can't understand it as an African American male. You know, he has championed health care. He has issued an executive order, that deals with immigration reform. Surely he can do something policy-wise that will help the African American community, particularly when we talk about safety. And I don't, I don't have a magic ball. I don't, pretend to have the answers. But I feel that given everything that has happened in the course of our nation's history, if he can't speak about it and actually do something about it, who will? And I think that he's got 2 years left. That should be I think that should be a large part of his legacy. There's a commission that he has championed on, African American and Latino voice, and commissions are great. But nothing happens. You have a discussion, you have a photo op, and nothing happens. Bill Clinton started an initiative on race. When's the last time you heard anyone say anything about it? Nothing came of it. We had an early on discussion in his administration about, affirmative action and mend it, don't end it. And just in the last few years, we've seen aspects of the Voting Rights Act dismantled. We see the poor or underemployed of every race having to stand in line, sometimes 8 and 10 hours long, to vote. I think there was a writer at the New York Times who said, and I agreed with them, in one of his columns, he said that asking poor people to wait in line to vote for 8 to 10 hours is no different than a poll tax. And it really is. So continually, the least among us in the most basic things, the right to vote, the right to an education, we get screwed and no one pays attention. He has an opportunity to go to Congress and do something about it. And quite frankly, I am not a politician, but going into 2016 and everybody's talking about it, I mean, if he goes to a Republican-led Congress and talks about the fact that our education system should not be based on zip code, and that every single American child has a right to an equal and an excellent education, it is the only way to reach the American dream. How does the Congress say no? Truly, how do they say no? If he says that we cannot allow police officers to gun down innocent people of any race because it's state-sanctioned violence, does the Congress really get up and say no and expect to get reelected? Maybe in some places, but eventually, and I don't say, and this is not an indictment of all Republican members of Congress, because one person doesn't speak for all, but there is a faction of the Republican Party that can no longer allow the leader of their party, the loudest leaders of their party, to be talk show hosts and radio hosts who are earning millions of dollars a year to spew rhetoric that I honestly don't believe half the time they even mean. It's destroying our country. And I think the president should take advantage and do more now, because it's his last 2 years. He has nothing to lose and everything to gain. Whether he'll agree with me is another story.
So, because there's so many African American families that are lacking of male house or head, what would you say if you were sitting in a room of 100 African American females what would you say, or give them the courage or the motivation to say you're doing a good job, or things that you can add to them to give them the courage to know that they're not alone, type thing?
I was interviewing African American women in a neighborhood in Southeast Washington in D.C. Several years ago, and we would just go to hair salons and the laundromat and just kind of talk to people and see what life was like. And one woman I spoke with, I asked her how many children she had, and I don't remember, but there were a lot. And I said to her, do they all have the same father? And she said, yes, Father God. And everybody in the hair salon sort of laughed, and it was funny, but in reality, not really funny. Every child needs a mother and a father, and the nuclear family is so important to our children and their well-being. But African American women have been soldiers always, you know, whether by being, you know, impregnated by slave owners or having their children stolen from them or killed. That I think we always know that we're not alone, but that it is incumbent upon us as African American women to sort of take the reins and realize that we can do better and that we owe it to our children to do better. You know, I think it's important to say, you know, there's this stereotype of the black female as being, you know, undereducated or uneducated and, you know, low income and, you know, lots of, I can't even get the phrase right, baby daddies or whatever the lingo was a few years ago, who just don't care. And I think it's important to say that every woman I have interviewed that lives in really despicable and very difficult circumstances always tell you the same thing, which is that they want their children to have a better life than they do. And they always know that education is the key. Not one single woman have I ever spoken to has ever said anything different to me. And what I learned as someone who I am a big cheerleader for personal responsibility, and as someone, you know, who is a big cheerleader for doing for yourself, what I realized is that not everybody knows how to do for themselves. And that's what I would say to women that find themselves in these circumstances. It is okay to ask for help and to admit that you don't know what you don't know. That's what I would say.
What's the role of government in answering those questions for somebody who doesn't know?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because, you know, we have this continual debate, you know, what is the role of government? Should government be limited? Should government be big? And you know, my philosophy now is that government needs to be smart. Like, forget the whole argument of limited or big government. Government needs to be smart. And again, and I don't take credit for this, years ago, President Obama was speaking before a joint session of Congress, and he, I think, coined the phrase smart government. I thought, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard. Government should do no more or no less for individuals than what they can do for themselves. In this debate, I have heard many, many learned people that say we don't need any more programs. There are programs out of the wazoo everywhere, but people don't know about them. Assuming that to be the truth, maybe the role of government is to make people aware of the programs that exist. My personal view outside of programs, the one thing that I will always be beating down the doors about is education. I don't understand how a country like ours that had people fighting for the right to equal access to an excellent education can sit back and watch a system that allows, continually allows children to be educated or not based on income level, based on zip code. There's something very wrong about it. All these years after Brown versus Board of Education, our school systems are still largely segregated, largely separate, and most definitely unequal. I mean, so if I had my wish list, my number one thing for the role of government would to completely dismantle the education system as we know it today. I'm a big proponent in school choice. I'm a big proponent of every parent being able to pick a school that will teach their children.
But doesn't that put at a disadvantage, you know, the children of the mother who doesn't know?
Yes, it does. Technically, it does. But that is where all of us have a role. If you look at the school choice movement now, and the country, at least many people in the country celebrate something called National School Choice Week every year, and I think it's coming up the last week in January, and it is a nationwide celebration. And what's interesting is you find whites and blacks, Democrats and Republicans finally have found an area of common ground, and you find grassroots organizations that so firmly understand the correlation between education and poverty that they will go out and they do their best to do the grassroots work so that the mothers and the fathers who don't know will understand. Now I'll tell you from parents that I have spoken to, they know that their schools are horrible. They know that. My experience has been people not having the confidence or not understanding that they have a right to go to school and say, my tax dollars, whether limited or not, pay your salary. And you don't have a right to look at my child and assume because they're black and they're poor that they cannot learn. People don't know that, or they don't feel comfortable that they have a right to do that. And that is, I think, the responsibility. Government can't do it all. We've got to do it ourselves. You know, I would love to see mothers and fathers all over the country going to rural neighborhoods and to urban neighborhoods and saying, what do you think about your kid's school? If it's good, they'll tell you. If it's horrible, they'll tell you. But they don't know what to do about it. A woman I spoke to once, who I deeply admired, was living in a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. called Berry Farms. And if you go and you look at Berry Farms, you're going to be, you can't live there and not be depressed. Conditions were horrific. Her children did not have any of their needs being met in terms of education or any kind of other infrastructure. No grocery stores, no this, no that, but lots of police officers around. And this woman who I have never forgotten said to me, we were talking one day, it was a very, just very weird. We were sitting on her front porch and someone had run over her cat. And the cat is laying dead in the middle of the street. And someone put a sheet over the cat, and the police officers are literally just driving up and down the street over the cat all day long. And it's hot outside, and we're just sitting and we're talking, and the dead cat to me is like a metaphor for the neighborhood. It was a dead neighborhood, and nobody cared because nobody stopped to remove this dead animal from the street. And we're talking, and she is weeping, and she says to me, "Have you ever heard the stories about women who kill all of their children?" And it just made my blood curdle. And obviously my first reaction was, is that something you're feeling? Is that something you think you would do? And she said, no. But she looked at me and she said, but I understand why they do it. And she told me she did not know how to help her children. That is a story that everyone needs to hear, because we've come so far. If we can elect an African-American president with the middle name Hussein against all odds, clearly somebody can figure out a way to at least ameliorate all of the problems that people have been talking about since I was a child. These are things I can remember as a child listening to my parents talk about in the kitchen with their friends, and here we are 50 years later and I'm talking about it and other people are talking about it. something has to change. We are victims of doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting things to be different.
What can be the catalyst for change? You watched the talk shows yesterday, and folks from the opposition party are berating the president for not doing enough in Iraq, not doing enough elsewhere in the Middle East, and we ought to have troops on the ground, basically spending more money outside the United States, while we have issues concerning education, we have issues concerning equal justice.
Yes.
People say we can't afford to put body cameras on policemen. We can't afford it. Clearly, there's an issue of priorities.
Yes.
What can be the catalyst to change that dynamic?
I think that we have seen the catalyst. I think it is burbling up very slowly in this cauldron of anger by people who have watched what many of us to believe to be the slaughter of innocent children. I think that is the catalyst. I think everything we have seen over the last year is the catalyst, and the deaths of these young men and of the police officers in New York a few weeks ago, I think has pulled the Band-Aid off of an old wound and has forced Americans to realize that we may have problems abroad, but we have problems at home. And I think that what I would hope is that people will now understand the importance of voting and realize you get what you vote for and you get what you don't vote for.
But we have problems here that money can't solve and voting can't solve. You look at, we say we have a representative democracy, but you look at sort of the total number of votes cast in the congressional elections, doesn't comport with the way Congress is organized, with gerrymandering and the like.
Well, unfortunately, I hear your frustration and I feel it completely. But we live in a land of laws that are constructed in a way where this is, outside of who we have to represent us, who will speak the loudest, who will refuse to back down and try to do something that will enact laws and policies that will inure to the benefit of the least among us. There's nothing else we can do. I think you have to just keep banging your head on the wall until you break through. I really do believe that it is a crime when people don't vote. You don't have an excuse not to vote. People died so that we can have the right to vote and the right to a representative government. We need more African Americans in Congress. We need more women in Congress. We need more of everything in Congress so that people will sit down and listen to one another and understand that we're all the same. I think, years ago, I ran into Jack Kemp and in a green room at NBC in Washington, D.C. A year or two before he passed away, and he was talking to me about one of the fascinating and positive attributes of football for him, because I just wanted to know how'd you get to be the way you are, was that everybody played together. You were teammates, black and white, and the objective together was to win. And that when you spend time with somebody who's different than you, it is very hard to dislike them on the basis of anything other than having a disagreeable personality. And I think that speaks volumes for why our government should be representative of all of the people who live in the country. And maybe that's, being Pollyannish. I meant it earlier today when I said I think we live in the greatest nation on earth, and I believe that we are capable of making this change.
But how can we make change when, given the current media landscape today, there can't even be an agreement on common facts?
Yeah.
40 years ago, 70 million people would listen to either the NBC Nightly News or the CBS Evening News.
Yes.
And that would provide a common baseline across America.
Yeah.
Today, it's about 7 million people who listen to those broadcasts. And everybody else, the biggest source of news is either Google or Yahoo.
Mm-hmm.
And with the way that they present news, it's based upon what you've searched for and the sorts of things that you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no common understanding even of the facts.
Yeah.
And the media becomes an echo chamber for what you'll listen to MSNBC or Fox, depending on your particular predilections, and it becomes an echo chamber that reinforces your view,
Yes.
which may or may not be comport with reality.
Yeah.
How do we get past that?
The media, the media reflects what people unfortunately purchase. And we live in a free market economy that sometimes works well and sometimes doesn't. But I do believe people not watching is what will change what you see on television and the way you watch television. I think it's one of the reasons that television might be dying, and you're seeing the emergence of like Netflix and Amazon and all this original programming on YouTube. People having YouTube channels with higher ratings than some of the networks. And again, it's because the American people are smarter than we sometimes give them credit. So it's very irritating right now. But I think that we are seeing the change come very, I think at a more rapid pace than you would imagine. I mean, and you will hear people who will say, I get emails all the time, oh, thank you so much for not screaming at so-and-so, or allowing so-and-so to talk because I really do want to hear what you see. I mean, there's some, I'm not a fan of reality television. I think it should be banned. But people watch it, and it's making money, and so unfortunately we're stuck with it. And when people don't watch, businesses think, okay, I'm not a nonprofit. I've got to give my audience what they want. So people listen. You write letters to the editor, or you turn off your television, or you don't listen to the radio station anymore, and you turn on, to watch the Golden Globes or whatever I was watching recently, and you see that most of a lot of the award recipients were programs that are on Netflix or Amazon.com. They have nothing to do with broadcast television, and I think we'll see that in print media also. It'll come. And education.
As an African-American female lawyer, what was it that spurred you into starting your own women's center? What happened that led you in that direction?
So, everything after law school for me has been by accident rather than by plan. I was running a women's organization that prior to my arrival had sort of been known as a very conservative organization for white women who lunch. And I went there part-time and then became full-time and became president. And really my mission for that organization was to bring the organization center and for it to be representative of all American women, and to find areas of common ground. And, and under my tenure, that's what happened. And I cannot think of her name, but the congressional candidate who ran, I think, in Delaware, and the sort of "I am not a witch" commercials came out. So I'm watching this, and some of the people that I worked with, whether inside of my organization or outside of that organization, saw what she was all about in a completely different way. And I just remember, I'm on one radio station and I'm just saying she doesn't deserve to be a member of Congress. She's an idiot. And somebody else is saying, people are discriminating against her because she's a woman. And this is from, conservative voices that will usually say, sex discrimination doesn't exist. And, and I just started feeling uncomfortable because the reality of the situation was I was, unapologetic in my support for then candidate Barack Obama. And while he was running, people who I was very fond of on both the right and the left were saying things that started to indicate to me that my vision of what the future of the country should look like were very different than theirs. And, and I would get phone calls and, this and that, and how could you say this about, Senator Obama? And my thing has always been, in a positive way. I mean, how could I say something positive about him? With the feeling being, by some, always say bad things about Democrats and positive things about Republicans. And vice versa. And my thing is, I call it like I see it. If a Democrat does something that's wonderful, I'm going to be their biggest cheerleader. And if they do something stupid, I'm going to say it. Same thing for Republicans. Barack Obama, to me, was the best candidate. And I felt it's the same reason that I am no longer a member of the Democratic or the Republican Party. I felt that in order for me to work on issues in furtherance of the way I think our country should be, I needed to do it on my own, and be able to work in an environment where I feel good and clean, and not accommodating on things that were very important to me every day. And so that's how I ended up.
So what one thing have you done in your organization that you think is like, I did this and was just a wonderful thing that you did, whatever that is?
My favorite, again, as you can see, there's a theme here. Education is very important to me, and I was doing an event in Connecticut, and found out the story of a woman in Ohio named Kelly Williams Bolar, who, I'm trying to find the right way to say it, she was dishonest about where she lived in order for her children to go to a school in a safe neighborhood. She was arrested. Her father, whose home address she used, which was really only a few miles from her home, but his neighborhood was safe and the schools were better and her neighborhood was unsafe. She was arrested, her father was arrested, and the charge was stealing an education. And then I met, and and Kelly's father, Kelly was eventually released. Her father actually, I believe, died either shortly before he was released or shortly after he was released for being complicit in what his daughter did. And then I was told a similar story about the same thing happening to a woman in Connecticut. And same thing, misrepresented her home address so that her children could go to a safe school where they would get an education. She was arrested. She was thrown in jail for stealing an education. And so we started a campaign and have done some ads about what education should be. And particularly during Women's History Month, one of the things that we have tried to focus on is that we don't want to advocate breaking the law, but that not all laws are moral and not all laws are unjust. And when you have women and men, but in this case it's women, single mothers who are doing everything they can by every metric that Americans look at to say this is a good mother, to raise their children, and you throw them in jail because they had to lie about the address where they live, because we have a system that thinks it's okay to relegate poor children to unsafe and or horrible schools, should be a crime. And maybe it is a law that's worth breaking. And,
well, maybe if she could afford a lawyer, say Patton Boggs, she could have gotten off, which raises the whole issue of equal justice under the law.
Yes.
You say you're an advocate of school choice. How do you feel about for-profit companies running charter schools?
My understanding is that it really depends on the management of the charter schools. I think that they are so new, and the thing that speaks the loudest to me is the hunger for them more than anything else, and I don't think it matters whether it is a for-profit or not. I mean, our government has not done well with all public schools. So it really doesn't bother me. You know, what bothers me more than anything else is that it is impossible to fire a teacher who is ineffective in our public school system. And, it is impossible to fire a teacher who thinks your kid just can't learn because they're poor and they're whatever, not white. To me, that is a lot more of a problem than a private company running a charter school, because, as far as I'm concerned, as long as the kids are learning and achieving, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
So on school choice, are you for the money following the child as a model?
I'm for every model. I am for homeschooling. I am for the money following the child. I am for parochial schools, private schools. My model of school choice is whatever mom and dad think is the best education that they can get for their children. They should be able to select it rather than being stuck in a neighborhood where the neighborhood school doesn't meet the needs of their children and no one else is willing to do anything about it.
I'm going to give you another scenario that might suggest there's a poverty problem too.
Yeah.
We were told by the state representative for Lancaster that one of the schools here struggles on tests if you look at the school.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at kids who went 1st through 5th grade through that school, they do great.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kids who come in and out all the time, and it's because the parents can't afford to stay in the same neighborhood. They fall behind in rent and they move.
Okay.
And so is there some basis of, I don't know what, housing help that is essential that's working? Or have you not heard this problem before?
No, I've actually not heard this before, and it's interesting, and I'm sure others who study these things are probably a lot more would probably be a lot more articulate on the issue. I think they all go hand in hand. I don't know so much. This is what I believe. I believe in the free market. I believe in our system of free markets and capitalism. I believe in competition. I do not know that housing so much is the issue as the inability to introduce competition into the education system. And those who do well will succeed, and those who don't should fail. It's like that in every other aspect of our economy, and our education system should be no different. And I think that if we introduce competition, those who are in danger of failing will either up the ante so that they can stay in business, or they fail and they go out of business. And I think that's the way it should be. I think you look at schools like the American Indian Public Charter School in Oakland, California. Absolutely fascinating school. Their head of school, Ben Chavis, is a Native American. He's a friend of mine. Ben told me that when he was growing up on his reservation, school started late and ended like a few hours early because people said that Native Americans couldn't wake up to go to school early. And Ben has dedicated his life to education, and he started this school, and his school, it's a charter school, receives less money per student than most schools in the state of California, and their graduation rate is almost 100%. And almost all of the kids who graduate using, I will tell you, sometimes school equipment that has been tossed out by other schools that don't want them anymore, old textbooks, but teachers who are creative and think out of the box and they're excited by teaching, they all go to college, every single one of them. And if Ben can do that, if we look at Jeffrey Canada and the Harlem Children's Zone, people are changing their models of how we educate our children based on charter schools sometimes, not always, that do so little, do so much with so little. Jeffrey Canada, every parent signs a contract. When their kid goes to that school, you will do homework with your children to the best of your ability. You will get your children to school on time, to the best of your ability. There was a school I visited in Little Rock, Arkansas, an elementary school in a low-income neighborhood where the principal, and it was a public school, the principal was so smart and innovative, and she loved her students and she loved her community, and she realized that in her neighborhood, most of the parents had 2 and 3 jobs, like night shifts and day shifts. So parent-teacher conferences during the week were just an impossibility. And she didn't think, oh, these are bad parents, they don't want to be involved with their kids. So she held parent-teacher conferences on Saturdays and Sundays so that people who were not, working on the weekend or doing a shift could be there. It's creative, and it is, to me, competing on a very high level to educate our children, and teaching is an incredibly difficult job. And I love teachers. Everyone can point to one teacher that made a difference in their life. But it doesn't mean that everybody who is in that profession should be a teacher. And I think introducing competition into the system may change that, so that it won't matter where you live or whether your parents can afford to pay the rent or not, so that you're not pulled in and out, because where you live should not have any basis for what type of school you have.
I have to say one thing as the sister of teachers, nothing makes a good teacher madder than a bad teacher.
Yes, I know,
You
because it
are
makes their
really-
job so hard. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is akin, sort of, probably too strong of an analogy, but it is akin to the person who cries rape when no rape existed. It makes it worse for every person who really was a victim of rape, and for every teacher who denigrates their students. It makes it horrible for the millions of teachers that are fantastic.
It does. You are a very interesting person.
Oh, thank you, thank
I mean,
you.
your views, you really do seem to be independent. You seem to be independent on issues. You seem to choose your.
I do.
You can't pigeonhole. You're not easily pigeonholed.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Which makes that
I wish everyone did. Everyone wants labels, but thank you, yeah.
We're still O'Reilly.
Does anyone else have anything they would like to ask, or anything you think you would have covered? This is kind of the question of the day.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about it. I just wonder what Dr. I'm sure everyone, it's kind of a cliche question, but it's kind of interesting. I think, what do you think Dr. King would make of the landscape today? What would he think of us today?
I think, I was in school with one of his kids. I was in school for a year with, or not in the same school, but a sister school to Dexter King. So sometimes when people ask me this question, I just think about us being freshmen in college, and like none of us ever thinking to say, like, what would your dad, what would your dad think about this? I think that Dr. King would be disappointed, but he would also be elated by the fact that there are people like you that are willing to have the conversation. I think he would say that this is part of the zigzag of social justice. You move forward, you retract. Then you move forward, you move a little further, and you retract. And you keep moving forward, and eventually you will reach what he called the promised land. I think that it would be difficult to believe that his heart would not be hurt by so many killings. And the negative reactions by so many people, simply because someone says, like, okay, he was, Michael Brown, stupid kid, shouldn't have been, doing whatever he was doing in that store with the cigarettes or cigarillos. But he didn't deserve to be killed. And to hear other people say, well, your people deserve what they get, I think he would say, is this what I lost my life for? And hope that we would get it together and do better. Because we can. We've done so many great things. And a nation that original sin was slavery, that could end slavery and could end Jim Crow, and that could elect the first African American president, can fix the evils that we've seen happen in our country over the last year. And I think Dr. King would recognize that and say, let's all do it together. Thank you.
Does anyone want to add to that?
Well said.
Thank you,
Thank you
thank
very
you,
much.
thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
being here tonight.
Thank you, it was my pleasure.
Yeah, it's